Hello everyone, let's start this new module. Before this module, we have already covered access authentication or user authentication using 2 or 3 different techniques. For example, 802.1x authentication, MAC address authentication, and SACG authentication. In this module, we're going to look at another technique of user authentication, which is called the portal authentication. We've already discussed this briefly in one of the earlier modules, but in this module, we're going to take a detailed look at the fundamental concepts of portal authentication. Then we look at the configuration and deployment, and finally, we'll take a brief look at the troubleshooting of the configuration that we have done, or the troubleshooting of portal authentication in our infrastructure. So first of all, let's take a look at the basic concept or the principles of portal authentication. What we mean by portal authentication is that in certain situations, we want the users to be authenticated by entering their username and password on a web portal provided by the Agile controller. This portal can be pushed to the users through the switch, through the aggregation switch, or through a wireless access point, the wireless controller, wireless access controller. So in either case, when this web page is pushed by the access controller or the wireless access controller or the aggregation switch, this is received from the Agile controller and pushed to the client side to the user. The user enters its username and password, and then the authentication is done by the Agile controller. So here you can see that the terminal is connected to the access device or to the switch. This is the point of authentication for us. This is the portal server where the web page is hosted, where the web page is residing, and this is the radius server or the authentication server. The authentication server shown here is optional. If you're using any Office on the client side for authentication, then we need the authentication server. Otherwise, the portal server and the radius server will come into play. And generally, they might be residing on the same physical server. It might be on the same machine. These two, portal server and radius server, they might be on the same service controller. So this is the very fundamental or the high level concept of portal authentication. Once we want to do portal authentication, this is how it would look. You can either have a wired connection to the aggregation switch or to the point of authentication, or we can have a wireless connection through an access point or access points or wireless infrastructure in our network, and then be connected to an access controller or wireless access controller. In this case, the wireless access controller is going to become the point of authentication. So in either situation, we can either have the switch as the point of authentication, or we can have the access controller as the point of authentication. We can have 2 different modes of portal authentication. In one mode, we can have the layer 2 authentication, and the other one is called the layer 3 authentication mode. In layer 2 authentication mode, the terminals are connected to the authentication device through the same layer 2 infrastructure, through the same layer 2 network. However, in this case, for example, the terminals are connected to the authentication point through a layer 3 network. They are not directly connected or not connected to the point of authentication through a layer 2 connection. It's a layer 3 connection, which means that they are connected to different networks. The layer 2 connection is more secure because here you can authenticate against the MAC address and the IP address, but here you can only authenticate against the IP address. So layer 3 authentication is less secure as compared to layer 2 authentication. If you look at the authentication process, it's fairly simple. Looks slightly tricky here, but it's fairly simple. The client initiates the HTTP request. Either the client can explicitly log in on the portal server, or it can just generate an HTTP request to go to the web, and the request is going to be redirected from the authentication point or the point of authentication to the portal server. In any case, what is going to happen is that the initial HTTP request comes here. This request is going to be redirected. If it's not explicit authentication, the request is going to be redirected towards the portal server, which means that the client is then going to send a request to the portal server, and the portal server login page will be displayed to the client. The client enters the username password. The portal server then optionally authenticates the authentication control device. This is the device authentication, not the client authentication. After authentication is done, then the portal server forwards the username password to the authentication control device. The authentication control device then forwards the username password to the radius server. The radius server is going to do the authentication, and if it's successful, let's say, then it is going to send the authentication result to the authentication control device. The control device does two things. On one side, it sends an accounting request, and as soon as the response is received, it then sends a portal authentication result to the portal server, telling the portal server that the user has been authenticated. The portal server informs the user or the client about the authentication success, and the client can then start browsing the web or whatever resources it wants to access. And on the other hand, the portal server also sends an acknowledgement for the authentication result which was received from the authentication control device. So this way the user gets authenticated, and now the user is free to access either the internet or the resources within the data center in the post-authentication domain. And all along, one thing that happens is that user's name has to be added to the username or online user database on the radius server, on the authentication control device, and on the portal server. Similarly, we can also have a user logging out of the system or out of the portal, which we call the user deregistration. In this case, the user sends a logout request or a deregistration request to the portal server. The portal server sends a logout notification to the authentication control device. This notice is forwarded, or this request is forwarded to the radius server in the form of accounting stop request. The radius server confirms accounting stop response, and at the same time the authentication control device sends a response to the portal server that the user has been logged out. And all these three devices are going to remove the user or delete the user from the list of online users that they maintain with them. In this way, the user is going to be now logged out of the system, and the user can no more access the resources that are available either in the post-authentication domain in the data center or over the internet. In the next video, we are going to look at the configuration steps for both wired portal authentication and for the wireless portal authentication.